I started this video quite a while ago, but I can't find the file, and I know that I did not like the intro that I did because I had no lashes. It was just a very unfortunate Maren moment. So I'm trying to find the lights in this room, which I don't seem to be able to find, so I'm just gonna deal with this. But this video is on Mars and Gemini, and it will be there for a total of 7 months, which is absolutely ridiculous. It entered Gemini earlier in August, and it's now September 4th, so it has been there for a little while. But I still want to get this video out because it goes retrograde at the end of October. It will station direct in the beginning of January, and it will end up being in Gemini for 7 total months, which is just, it's not like unheard of, like planetary things happen, but it is very rare that a planet is in that sign for that long, especially Mars. Mars usually spends about 2 months in a sign, and it goes through 6 signs a year generally, and these retrogrades are part of that process. If you actually look at Mars's orbital kind of like synodic cycle, it's really beautiful. If you just look at what it looks like when Mars is doing its orbit around the solar system, patterns and everything around that, it can be really lovely. So getting into the intro, like explaining what this transit really means, Mars is action, aggression, it's fighting, it's conflict, and the sign that Mars is in at a given period explains what kind of conflict is happening. Gemini is an air sign concerned with communication, and it's ruled by Mercury, which is communication and intellect and logic. So Gemini tends to be a sign of brainstorming, of getting information up to the surface, of bringing things to light. It is not Virgo, which is discerning what is valuable and weeding those details down. It is very much, let's have like conversation word vomit all over the place, and let's get that information out there to then bounce off of one another. Often Geminis can have a very short attention span, but be very conversational, and they're very interested in getting everything to the surface and talking about it. And Mars in Gemini therefore represents conflict, it represents debating, it represents arguing more, it represents getting more of your perspective out there. So it's great for debate. Like the number one thing that Mars in Gemini will be great for is dialectical debates and conversations that are trying to get to a middle ground or refine. Like the principle of dialectical is bouncing ideas off of different perspectives to come to a more refined version. I think it's a really beautiful way to look at the ongoing moral or theoretical or mental process. Like the mentality of the collective as a dialectical is a really good ideal in my opinion, because it means that we're constantly bouncing off of one another rather than fighting. However, the downside of Mars and Gemini is argumentativeness and feeling like your data or your interpretation of that data is the end all be all. Taking anecdotes as fact is a big risk with this one, because Mars and Gemini is like me, like my ideas, my intellect, my interpretation is fact, suck it. That can be a downside of Mars and Gemini, especially given the fact that Mars in Gemini is going to station retrograde nearly exactly square Neptune, which shows that with Mars retrograde, we are rethinking our actions, we are rethinking our debates, we are rethinking our attention and what we believe. Squaring Neptune is like, whoa, I am majorly confused. I feel like I'm on an unclear footing here. I don't fully understand the side I'm taking. Let me reconsider. The plus side is, yeah, you don't fucking know shit, so shut up and reconsider. The downside is thinking that everyone else is having the need to reconsider, not ourselves. So my intro and invitation is that over the next 7 months, do not take too firm of a hold on any of your ideas or ideologies. You can still represent them, but be very open to bouncing them off of one another. Do not identify with them. For example, I am vegan. I have eaten vegan for 7.5 years. However, upon doing a lot more literary research, you could say, over the past few years, analyzing the microbiome, I can see that even though on large-scale meta-analyses, plant-based diets are the best for preventing obesity, preventing high BMI, preventing all this disease. But in many people, their microbiome, based on what they grew up around and what they just anecdotally, without trying to be bad people, they do not feel their best on 100% plant-based diets. Do I give a shit? Not really. Do your best, do what makes you feel best. And there are even the people that I admire, like Michaela Peterson, who somehow on an entirely meat diet feel their best. Am I gonna say, like, no? Like, there's no way for me to counter someone's literal life and be like, I don't believe you. Because largely I do. People are generally good people when it comes to that. So that's the thing where I can have I can be like, this is the way that I live my life. Do I hold it near and dear and like suffocate that till I die? No, because if you feel your best and you're like literally in with your conscience saying, I need to do this, I'm not gonna fucking argue with you. We all have our own way of justifying, which could be very valid, different from other people. So So that's just an example of the way that you can have a perspective but hold it a little bit lightly, not like near and dear, and like have it to where whenever someone presents some argument of like this nutrient is a little bit difficult to get on an entirely plant-based diet, you want to eat kelp and eat like Brazil nuts, that doesn't offend me. Like, okay, thank you for the data point. You know what I mean? It's like that. So that's a personal example of the way that you might apply Mars and Gemini to your own life. I'm going to continue to learn to hold, which I, at this point, because I was so like fucking wrapped up in my beliefs early on in life, I become a very, very good detached belief person where I ask for life to obliterate my belief systems daily. I'm like, I will become a better, smarter, more rounded person when I get life obliterating my beliefs daily, which is why I study philosophy, I think. But that is an example of, I think, a good approach to managing Mars and Gemini squaring Neptune, because likely you don't have all the information, neither does the other person. There's no savior. There is no one end-all be-all piece of literature that's going to have the science, the experts, oh, God forbid. But in these charts, I'm going to show how Mars and Gemini throughout history generally has been associated with civil disputes in the US, Mars retrograde and what that's brought up in the past, because Mars in the US's chart is in the 7th house of like teams or opponents, and in a country that generally is like the two parties of the populace. So it doesn't really look good at all. I would never say that a retrograde is good. I would not say that it's bad, but it generally is unpreferable. And Mars retrograde in Gemini squaring Neptune is not something I like to see. However, we can have fun in backtesting and seeing what has come up during the previous transits of this. But like I said, Mars, aggression and conflict, Gemini, communication and banter and debate. So arguing is going to be a big thing. That is pretty, that sounds so fucking stupid. Arguing is going to be a big thing. Debate and fighting over data and election outcomes, because this is going to station retrograde during the midterms, very, very likely, as well as squaring Neptune, probably fighting over the validity, over the, like, people are going to be fucking confused. And I'm going to get into exact examples with these charts once I prep this and film this. And I'm going to take my makeup off because I'm very, very sweaty after a long day running through New York and the MTA, which just is all the AC out. I thought I fucking left Europe, which may not be today when I film the second part of this, but I'm doing the research and doing things tonight. So hope that you enjoy this. I guess I'll do a fit check. I did a fit check in my Venus and Virgo video that I filmed earlier today, but you can see the fit still here with horrible lighting. So it's this corset top. This is so bad. You can watch the fucking Venus and Virgo video if you want to see an actual fit check. But it's my corset top, parts of 4 necklace, shorts, this. I had on cute Gucci shoes, but they were hurting me because they had platforms and I walked. Let me see my step count. This feels like a very Mars and Gemini thing. Let me check my step count. Nearly 14,000 steps. So if you can see that, nearly 14,000, which is a pretty normal day, but I did like all my walking at night. So that's that. It felt appropriate. Sorry for the long intro. Not sorry. You can suck it. See ya.
So now into explaining the actual transits, predictions, and details of what I expect for this Mars retrograde in Gemini. Essentially, this whole transit of Mars in Gemini from, now I'm filming this in September until the end of March when it leaves. I give a little bit of an intro how Mars is aggression, Gemini is data and conversation, and retrograde will mean rethinking these things and looks like just midterm fuckery in the way this is playing in the US chart. So to give a rundown of dates as we begin. Mars entered Gemini on August 20th, 2022. It does not leave Gemini until March 25th, 2023, and in between that time, it is retrograde October 30th, 2022 until January 12th, 2023. So it entered August 20th, it goes retrograde October 30th, it then stations direct January 1st, it stations direct January 12th, and then it speeds through and leaves by October 25th. So that's a total of 7 months, which is pretty extreme, and it does this because it reaches the end of Gemini, it then goes retrograde all the way back to the beginning and then has to go through again, so the normal 2-month period is then stretched into 7 months essentially. And the general themes that I'm noticing throughout the back testing of when this has happened before is, for one, amendments of previous constitutions or renegotiations between countries, which makes sense because it's kind of like rethinking the written work of a country or rethinking interactions with the people that you're seeing around you, like your neighboring countries. So renegotiations are, I've seen that happen. Also, air crashes. There's been several transits that have indicated having certain natural disasters or transportation disasters, and air crashes seem to be relevant in Mars retrogrades more so than normal, and this could be like retrograde in air sign. That makes sense. And then data breaches, so leaks, hacks, data breaches, much more common on a wide scale, as well as disruptive new beginnings in technology. So the new beginnings part is a little bit interesting, but disruptive new beginnings in technology were clear. So I'm going to run through the previous times when Mars retrograde in Gemini happened and what occurred. There were some periods where it went retrograde in Gemini and then went back into Taurus, or it retrograde in Cancer and then went back into Gemini. I'm going to specify the details of that for every instance here, and this will be very informative, but I hope that this paints a clear picture. So, you know, get a snack, put me on while you clean the house, drive, etc. So the first instance that this happened was December 31st, 2007. So Mars was retrograde from November 15th, 2007 until January 30th, 2008. And on December 30th, 2007 until January 30th, 2008, Mars was retrograde in Gemini. So it was in Cancer and then it entered Gemini. On January 21st, 2008, stock markets around the world plunged because of the growing fears of a US Great Recession. And this was fueled by the 2007 subprime mortgage crisis. That is from the Wikipedia page on the Great Financial Crisis. And also during this time, I thought it was funny, this is an aside, that the online activist group Anonymous initiates Project Chinology after a leak. Ah, kitty. Hello. Basically, there was a leaked interview of Tom Cruise, and by the Church of Scientology issued a copyright infringement claim, and Anonymous rebelled against it. They rioted, and the church was getting DOS attacks, phone nukes, black faxes. I don't know what that is, but sorry, Church of Scientology, I guess. Then October 20th, 1990 until December 14th, 1990, Mars was retrograde in Gemini again. It did go into Taurus and was not direct until January 1st, 1991. But on November 13th, 1990, the first known web page is written. On November 17th, 1990, the Soviet President Gorbachev proposes a radical restructuring of the Soviet government, including the creation of a federal council to be made up of the heads of the 15 Soviet republics. So restructuring, rethinking country, written and management. November 19th to the 21st, the leaders of Canada, the US, and 32 European states meet in Paris to formally mark the end of the Cold War. Then the next time that this happened was November 25th, 1975 until January 20th, 1976. Mars began to be retrograde in Cancer November 6th, it then re-entered Gemini on November 25th and was direct January 20th. So on November 29th, 1975, the name Microsoft, short for microcomputer software, is issued by Bill Gates in a letter to Paul Allen for the first time, and this was right before Microsoft was a registered trademark later the next year. So this was the first iteration of Microsoft as the name, and on December 8th, 1975, New York City is approved for a bailout of $2.3 billion each year through 1978. So a lot of what I'm noticing as financial reconsiderations are happening of the way that things are structured, written, and promised. Then on October 28th, 1943 until January 10th, 1944, Mars was retrograde in Gemini. And frankly, this period resembles our period the most astrologically because, for one, this entire retrograde was in Gemini. Two, calendar-wise, starting in October and ending in January is very similar to this retrograde happening, like date-wise. And just get ready as I run through this one. So on October 28th, 1943, Mars began its retrograde, and then on November 3rd to 4th, 1943, was Action Erntefest, Operation Harvest Festival, the largest single-day massacre of Jews in the entire Holocaust, which takes place when over 43,000 Jews are shotgunned to death by the SS and some other groups, Ukrainian collaborators, in Majdanek, Trauniki, and Poniatowa concentration camps in the general government territory of occupied Poland. The chart of this was a lot gnarlier than what's happening for us, so I'm not at all claiming that this, no. When I say it's the most similar, I was just saying that, the markings and the signatures were the most similar astrologically. This chart is really gnarly. It has Mars, Saturn together in Gemini, both retrograde. It has Venus squaring that, and Pluto on the south node with Jupiter nearby, which is just Pluto on the south node during this is really intense. Actually, my grandmother escaped from Majdanek. If you know my story, and you can watch my Poland vlog, but basically, my grandmother was actually a Holocaust survivor, and she escaped from Majdanek right before this happened. So that's a little bit of an interesting side note. On November 5th, 1943, during World War II was the first bombing of the Vatican. 4 bombs are dropped on the neutral Vatican City. Aircraft responsible is never identified. November 15th, Orajmos, German SS leader Heinrich Himmler orders gypsies to be put on the same level as Jews and placed in Nazi concentration camps. November 18th, World War II was the Battle of Berlin, when the British Royal Air Force opens its bombing campaign against Berlin with 440 planes, causing only light damage and killing 131. Also also the Bengal famine of 1943 happened. And I actually forgot to mention this up front, but another theme was famines and food shortages, which is a little bit interesting because Gemini is not inherently tied to food or consumption, but I think that the intake aspect, or the aspect of commerce and getting from one place to another and like trade routes and lines, that makes sense. And this was there during 1943. And so that's another point. Then January 11th, 1944, President of the US FDR proposes a second Bill of Rights for social and economic security and his State of the Union address. So that is the most similar to ours astrologically, and I think that it makes sense based on just the ongoing like boom, boom, boom World War II energy when we are, experiencing a kind of proxy war, an ongoing war in Russia, Ukraine. I do not think that this is nearly as challenging as that astrology, but I do think that the Mars retrograde in Gemini of that period resembles ours the most. So the last back-tested time I went to is December 20th, 1928. So Mars began its retrograde in Cancer on November 11th, 1928. It then entered Gemini on December 20th, and it went direct in Gemini on January 27th, 1929. And interestingly enough, on January 29th, so like right after this, All Quiet on the Western Front was published, and Mars would have still been like stationed it would have stationed direct. So I still think that this qualifies, but I do think it's interesting that All Quiet on the Western Front was published during this time. So I'm going to now get into how this is in the United States chart, which I think is the most relevant, and this will be the most relevant. So Mars will be in the United States 7th house, and the natal 7th house of the US contains Mars. So basically Mars is returning in the US chart. The US has Mars in Gemini in its 7th house. Mars is entering Gemini in its 7th house, meaning that Mars is being reiterated, or it is being highlighted in the US chart. Whenever Mars enters the US 7th house and the Mars return happens, it tends to involve a lot of civil partisan issues. The 7th house is one-to-one sides and opponents. It's not just marriage partner, it can be the person on the other side of the battlefield. So this makes sense that, for one, the most challenging planet in the US chart is Mars in the 7th house, showing partisan issues and civil infighting of boundaries and like binary parties being the major issue in the US. And also that when Mars enters Gemini, crosses Uranus, the descendant, and Mars again, it highlights this. So just verbatim, anytime Mars is in Gemini or that 7th house is very, very challenged, it tends to highlight partisan civil issues and discord. Caution for October 1st to 7th, which is the first week of October, obviously, and it is when Mars is exactly returning. It is still direct then, and it will be squaring Neptune. This is not an easy transit, so I think we're opening October with a partisan fighting issue. Then there is an eclipse on October 25th, and this is right before Mars stations retrograde. So I'll leave the full video on the eclipse to stand for itself because that's not the focus of this video, but the eclipse is happening in the US 12th house. It looks like a revealing of behind the scenes hidden confidential information. There's the South Node there, so there's a release quality, and the 12th house is behind the scenes hidden confidential information, and hence to involve like secrets or things that are in denial. And Mars is retrograde in Gemini. It's about to go retrograde. It's stationing essentially. It's at the degree that it will station retrograde. And the square to Neptune shows an obvious lack of clarity or honesty. So even though Mars is not yet retrograde, it is literally it's stationing. It's very slow. And this looks like, for one, because there's a release of confidential information, it's likely around the midterm elections and politics. Two, because Mars is in Gemini squaring Neptune, it looks like lack of honesty, clarity, and truth around data is going to be happening. We can obviously assume this. Anyone is going to know that no election results are ever accepted now. There's always fighting. There's always lack of like belief in them. So it looks like drama because of a release of confidential information. It looks like not only is this midterm season involving election disputes, but also the release of confidential information leading up to it that is a big release of something being kept behind the scenes and further informs this rejection of election results. Then Mars goes retrograde on the 30th, and there's another eclipse with Mars retrograde then on November 8th. This eclipse still has Mars at 25 degrees. It's very slow. It has not moved, and it's now also squaring Jupiter because Neptune and Jupiter are both in Pisces. Jupiter just re-entered Pisces. So it's a continuation of fighting over these results, and the conjunction to Uranus during this conjunction is very shocking. I really don't like this. This looks like a big release of drama of like, there'll be a full video out on this because I haven't dissected this eclipse that heavily compared to the other one because it's in November, so I have not done November astrology yet. However, with this highlighting the same part of the US chart and on Uranus, like with Mars retrograde squaring Neptune, this looks like, I'd say, a reaction to the disputed data that could be a civil uprising. Now, November 20th to the 27th, Mars is crossing the US natal Mars again. So if there was an issue highlighted in the first week of October when Mars direct crossed over that Mars, then when Mars retrogrades back over that Mars, the other way, November 20th to 27th, it looks like that issue will be re-highlighted and relevant again and will be gone back on or fought over again. Now with Saturn direct and the Saturn-Uranus square happening, Saturn is direct and it's in the superior position to Uranus. So this background energy of the Saturn-Uranus square, which is tensions between keeping the status quo and being conservative versus rebelling and fucking shit up, with Saturn in the superior position, 90 degrees ahead of Uranus, with Saturn direct and with Saturn in its own sign, I think that this is going to involve a lot of this backlash against conservatism or a past-oriented point of view because Saturn has the stronger position and the chokehold on Uranus, essentially. Then December 17th to the 20th, Mars crosses the US descendant, which is another dicey period from the 17th to the 20th. Then the first week of January, Mars crosses the US Uranus, which is very chaotic to start off the year. I think it would be a very chaotic beginning of 2023 in the US. And then it stations direct January 12th, 2023, literally conjunct the United States Uranus, which looks like major civil instability is the ending response. This leads me to think that there definitely is, like, I don't like the saying red wave necessarily, but like an overall past-oriented orientation that is getting a backlash very heavily beginning of this year or next year, 2023. Then February 8th to 9th, it crosses the US descendant again. And then March 5th to 6th, the Mars return happens again as Mars finally goes back across the end of Gemini. So all of those dates that I'm mentioning look very relevant for civil instability, but the particular dates that look intense are the eclipses around the election cycle and then again early on January. And right after this, Mars enters Pisces, which is another note. So for Biden, the eclipses October 25th and November 8th are gnarly in his chart. I will go over those specifically in those videos, but the last week of December looks further difficult for him. So Mars is on his Saturn and Saturn is ruling the second house and third house. So media and communication about him will likely be interesting. So with the second house, it could be a financial leak of ways that he has spent money or financial affiliations. And the station direct, like right when Mars stations direct, it is right on his Saturn, which looks very challenging regarding a serious relationship to someone being broadcast in the media poorly. My mind immediately goes to Money and Hunter and Together, not because of anything I've heard. Frankly, I don't follow stories that much around that, but it looks like affiliation to someone that he's close to. It could be a different partner. It could, because children aren't really implicated in this. It could be someone else that he's close to and a financial comment about that being leaked and being difficult to deal with. That's how I would put all this together, but it's mostly intense for him around the midterm elections with those goddamn eclipses. Interestingly enough, for Kamala, this is my most interesting section, even though I think that the eclipses and the comments on her chart there are the most interesting. This is stationing retrograde right on Kamala's ascendant and north node. Her ascendant and north node are at 24 degrees of Gemini. Mars goes retrograde at 25 degrees of Gemini. So this retrograde of rethinking action, being assertive, the aggression in someone's chart is happening not only in her first house of self, but right on the indicator of identity and who she is and what she's going after. And because in March 2023, Mars direct is crossing her ascendant again during that month, and Saturn is also on her midheaven, Saturn being responsibility and challenge on the direct indicator of public image and career for her, it looks like something about her identity that this retrograde represents this fall involves her then having to move forward and step up during March 2023. And frankly, I do think she could be stepping into taking on power then with all this Mars retrograde and then direct crossing her north node ascendant, Saturn crossing her midheaven. It looks like some serious responsibility she's stepping into, and the retrograde represents info coming out possibly around the US and Biden that may lead her to stepping into power in the spring. So piecing that all together is kind of crazy, and I feel like that guy pointing at the board like schizoing out, but I think that you see how all these components work together. The major themes for everyone are taking action to revise what you've built or gone forward with in the Gemini house in your chart. The square to Neptune overall, I really don't like for the lack of clarity and the probably very relevant partisan chaos over election results and points of view, but it's not the end of the world, and I think think that the awareness of how this has played out in the past leads us to expect government restructuring, specifically neighboring countries, which is a little bit more relevant for Europe, and also rethinking of disruptive tech and how that plays out. So I hope that this is helpful. Hope that this gives context. I need to make it to a dinner, so we'll see you all in the next one.
Oh, but there is one.